Good morning, everybody. Well, now that we've done New Year's, I'm going to go back to talking about Shantideva. This is talk number 7. So I'm going to kind of recap. I'm going to recap the talks, the points that, well, maybe I should back up. So Shantideva was the 8th century Buddhist monk, not a Zen monk. And he wrote a text called the Bodhisattva, the Guide to the Bodhisattva Way of Life. This is a copy of it. There are many translations of this, both in Sanskrit, from the Sanskrit and from the Tibetan. Most of the translations are from the Tibetan because this is a major text in Tibetan Buddhism. And he essentially covers various aspects about practice. And this chapter on patience is one of the most famous chapters from this book. So we've been talking about how to cultivate patience. Now, in this text, Guide to the Bodhisattva Way of Life, this text, the main point of cultivating patience is as an antidote to anger. But I would like to take this more broadly and talk about this as a way to cultivate skillful means. And so that's what we're doing here. Now, let me recap the previous talks. These are just sort of like, what the previous talks, what the previous teachings were that Shantideva gave. So we want to recall our practice and our vow to engage in skillful response. I'll just tell you personally, I feel like our practice in a nutshell is about being skillful. I feel it's about cultivating compassion. And this is compassion that's smart, not just some kind of like way in which we extend ourselves in ways that are not helpful or that are problematic. So it's about compassion. It's about wisdom, which is understanding the interconnectedness of everything. That is what wisdom is about. And then skillful means, which is the byproduct of all of this. So how do we act skillfully towards each other? That, and in the ways that we deal. So to me, that's like the crux of what our practice is. And out of that comes beneficial action. So forget about enlightenment. Anyway, the first one we talked about recalling your practice and our vow, which is very important, this vow that we want to engage in skillful activity. And that this will fortify your effort because doing this is hard. The second talk was noticing and bringing to mind that being agitated just doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel good in your body to be angry and upset. And it's actually bad for your health. So you can use this as a motivation to practice. Cultivate practice in situations that are easy to work with. It's like building muscles. So if you want to be able to deal with something that's difficult, learn how to deal with things that are easy to begin with. So that's really important. So you can't just slough things off because it's not so important. So for example, I think turning on your blinker while you're driving isn't, practice of acknowledging that there are other people on the road with you and they might like to know that you are about to turn, which means you're going to slow down, et cetera. So that's a simple practice that we can do that helps us cultivate patience, or not yelling at the person in front of you, even though they can't hear you, all the things that we go through our heads. All right, so if you do that, then you can encourage yourself to practice at times when it is really hard, right? And so that's the next one. And then finally, everything is interrelated. Everything is causally connected with everything else. And if we realize that, it can create a kind of space for us to be able to respond to situations Like if you realize that somebody is being unskillful or that you are being unskillful, and you know that your unskillfulness arises from the causes and conditions of your life, and that that person's unskillfulness arises from the causes and conditions of their life, it allows you to have more patience, to be more spacious, to be more generous about the way that you respond to yourself and other. So those are the things that we've talked about so far. Okay, so this is verses 52 through 65 in this text. Now here, Shantideva, he says, why do we become upset when people say hurtful things to us? So that's his basic question here. Or if maybe somebody says something about an institution, a religion, some organization that we care a lot about, they say something negative about it, like what is it about that upsets us so much? Because he says, if you're not physically hurt, then what's your problem, basically? And so he says it's kind of like sticks and stones can hurt my bones, but words will never hurt me. So that's, how we usually kind of talk about that. So Shantideva is saying, when those situations happen, when we feel really defensive and we want to lash out or we're really upset by what's going on, because we believe that somehow we're being verbally attacked. So that's what he's talking about here. So he asks in one of the verses, he said, since disrespect, harsh speech, and unpleasant words do not cause any harm to my body, why mind you become so angry? Like, why do we get so upset in those situations? So I would say if we are grounded in the Dharma, if we have confidence in our practice, then our own stability is not going to be destroyed when we receive something that we don't want to receive in the way of someone's criticism or being upset with us or something like that. Now, let's go back to driving. Let's say you didn't turn your blinker on and you turn in front of somebody or whatever, and they shoot you the finger. So sometimes people can get really, really unhappy when something like that happens. Like they might even follow you, which is kind of scary. But, how do we respond to that? Are we defensive? Or do we acknowledge the fact that we actually did something that was unskillful and probably scared the other person? I mean, do we have to take this as some kind of horrible thing that we have to respond to, that's some kind of deep affront to our own nature, to our sense of self? Does this make sense? And so this having a kind of grounding in practice, like saying, oh, that's the causes and conditions of me not, using my blinker, and the causes and conditions of this person, and this is the way they're responding because maybe they were scared or whatever it is, that we allow to have some spaciousness in there. And that creates this way in which we can be more skillful. And that we don't just automatically have this kind of knee-jerk response to it. So he says, why mind you become, I'll just use upset. Why do you become upset when things like this happen? So we need to be grounded in the Dharma, have confidence in our ability to practice, and then our own stability is not going to be destroyed when somebody does or says something to us that we don't like, that upset us. So this could be because somebody says something to us that kind of upsets our view of self, who we are as a person. And that can be destabilizing. We don't like that. The other thing that can happen is sometimes when people say things to us, it triggers a kind of deep trauma, right, that we already have. And here we have this situation of causes and conditions. So this kind of deep trauma that comes up for us. And that's why we say that it's really important to understand ourselves so that we can understand where these trigger things are for us that come up, and thereby maintain our sense of equanimity. So in Buddhism, the self is not a permanent fixed entity. because we're in this interconnected relationship with the totality of all of reality, right? And we're not like, an island somehow. We are dependent upon, I mean, just practically, we're dependent upon the earth and the sun and water and food that comes from that, and relationships, and all of this must be existing for us. And so this person, this self, is not permanent. And if we understand that about the self, I think that can create a kind of flexibility. It's a way in which we can bend with the things that happen. We have a kind of flexibility and resilience to the things that happen. The Japanese have an expression which is the wise bamboo bends in the wind. So this kind of wisdom of this flexibility. So this bending in the wind is not a capitulation. It's not surrendering or giving up. What it means is that we are willing to engage in practice. We're willing to respond to things in ways that have equanimity, in which we don't escalate a situation. I think the way we do this is by using our head, our brain, instead of these emotions that kind of run away with us. So if you can recall the teachings in a situation like that, then we're going to be more likely to be able to respond with equanimity than if we just have a knee-jerk response to what's going on, where we feel like we need to protect the self in some way. So we don't want to let our emotions lead us around by the nose. In Zen, we have this image of an ox, which is a huge animal with a ring in its nose. You can lead an ox around by the ring in its nose, this huge animal. So there's this way in which if we let our emotions just push us around, it's like being an ox with a ring in its nose. I would even say that the rest of, if we're going to carry this analogy, the rest of that ox is this interconnected, complete, realized being, right? And then we stick this ring in its nose, and all of a sudden we're like weenie beanie crazy people. So, we really want to remember and engage in practice. Okay, so one of the things that Shantideva does in this book is he engages in rebuttal. So he pretends that he is the person who's rebutting the teachings that he's giving. So he asks this person, the oppositional response is, Shantideva asks, see if I can find this in my notes, why would we be threatened? And the person who is responding to this says, it will hinder my worldly gain and because others will dislike me. So that's why this person is getting upset. Now, Shantideva says, well, worldly wealth is not worth creating harm in the world. I think actually we could probably all agree with that. And then the verse he writes is, okay, here's the rebuttal. Surely material wealth will enable me to live in such a way that I shall be able to consume evil and do good. So the rebuttal is, why shouldn't I get wealthy? Because I'm going to do good things with the money. That's what he's saying here. Shantideva says, but if you are angry on account of it, will not your merit be consumed and evil increase? So he's saying, because remember here, we're talking about getting defensive about stuff and getting angry. We're not talking about, best case scenario here that really you do make a lot of money and you do all these, beneficial things and all that kind of stuff. He's saying, if your reason or part of getting all this money or wealth, I'll say power or anything like that, comes out of this anger, comes out of this motivation of anger, then that's not okay. So, So his original argument is if you're afraid of losing wealth because someone is disparaging you verbally, and you get defensive and angry about it and engage in retribution because of it, then we're causing suffering. And the suffering is going to cause a bad rebirth. And I want to remind you that in Zen, we don't really talk about rebirth very much. The reason we don't talk about rebirth is because we're really about the present moment, like, what's happening right now. So Shantideva uses a bad rebirth, as does much of early Buddhism. Bad rebirth is like this carrot to get you to, to get you to do the right thing. It's sort of like, you're damned if you don't do the right thing. So he uses this carrot in here, but this is really not a carrot that works very well for most of us in Zen. The reason we want to do these things is not to avoid a bad rebirth, but to engage in beneficial action, to find skillful means to, create a better world, if you will, for self and others, even small ways like turning on our blinker. So this is, here he talks about a bad rebirth, but I don't think we need to worry about that. So, we can make analogies about this. We can talk about greed and power, or any other acquisitive behavior. I think we can use that as a way to think about that. So, for example, we have a president right now who is very much engaged with, I think, greed for power. Seems to be that is very important to this person. And therefore, they are very susceptible to getting upset and engaging in retributive actions because of it. So that's something that we want to avoid. We want to avoid having that kind of mindset, and find ways to engage in our life in such a way that the motivations and reasons for why we're doing things really come from a wholesome place, and that they are a kind of angry response to things. Then Shantideva asks the question, why don't we get upset when other people are disparaged? So have you ever had a situation at work where you go and you start gossiping about a coworker and you're saying negative things about a coworker? It doesn't even occur to us that perhaps that person may not appreciate the fact that we are disparaging them. As a matter of fact, usually when we engage in that, we're doing it in a way that actually is fairly enjoyable. Have you had that experience? You don't know, right? So it never occurs to us that maybe that other person, the person we're talking about, might be quite upset if they knew that these things are being said about them. So so that's something that we certainly should keep in mind. And then the flip side of that is sometimes we get really upset when somebody disparages a friend of ours or says something that we don't like, that they're saying, criticizing them. Or maybe we don't like it if somebody criticizes our religion or some organization that we care about or some kind of political view that we have, all those kinds of things. And then we might feel like we have to strike back. So we're right now, we're living in a very polarized time. And part of the problem is that people do want to strike back, and they do become very upset. So this is a great teaching for what we're experiencing right now. So I think, the teaching is, how do we maintain this mind of equanimity? How do we maintain a mind of equanimity when some property, sacred property, is damaged, for example, or people are hurt or killed in the context of this? And sometimes we're often frightened for our own safety and for the safety of the people that we care about, or just generally safety of others. Shantideva says, I should prevent anger arising towards those who injure my spiritual masters, relatives, and friends. Instead, I should see, as in a manner shown before, that such things arise from conditions. I'll read that to you again. He says, I should prevent anger arising towards those who injure my spiritual masters, relatives, and friends. Instead, I should see, as the manner shown before, that such things arise from conditions. Okay, so here he's talking again about this. Why is it that people are, so polarized? Because the causes and conditions of their life are such, as are ours, that their sense of self is probably being seriously challenged. And when our sense of self is being challenged, we feel like we're being annihilated. And when we feel like we're being annihilated, then we feel like we have to strike back. So we end up with this situation where either personally it's like that, or we align ourselves with a group with this kind of mindset. And so he's saying, these kinds of extremes are just not helpful. As a matter of fact, they're harmful. So if we think about, this about politics, and something that is being very much in the vogue right now is this idea of sitting with people and talking to each other and listening to each other and just being willing to be present and find out about what the other person is thinking. And that's that way in which when we do that, we find out why the other person is feeling the way they're feeling, why somebody is feeling disenfranchised, why somebody feels like they need to strike out and engage in behavior that's harmful. And we share maybe our own views about why we're where we're coming from. And inevitably, when we do that, it creates a kind of empathy and sharing, and we can understand why that person may feel that way. We may not agree with them, but we see that in ourselves as well, because we're all human beings. So we understand these motivations that we all share and have together. And when that happens, this spaciousness arises, this kind of flexibility arises, and we start to see each other as part of the same tribe, as human beings, not as somehow enemies of each other. So the situations, Shantideva says, remember that things arise from conditions. Nothing is in a vacuum. Sometimes, like some of the things that are going on right now, we may feel the need to, we want to demonstrate, we want to go out and we want to express the fact that we don't agree with something. I don't think Shantideva is saying there's anything wrong with that. In Buddhism, we don't say, it's not about being passive. It's not about not doing anything. But the question is, how do we do it? The question is, can we do this with a stable mind? Can we do it with equanimity? Can we do it with a kind of compassion towards each other? So I have a story that I've told before. When I was in my 20s during the Vietnam War, and I was demonstrating against the war, and it was a big demonstration. And I was like, I remember I was in a parking lot or something, but anyway, there was a policeman there with a baton. And I was yelling at him, you pig, you're just a fascist pig, right? And he comes up to me and he's got his baton up like this, right? And I figure, okay, this is it. I'm gonna get hit up the side of the head with this baton. And he stopped and he looked at me. He just looked at me and he put his baton down and he walked away. And I knew in that moment that what went through his head was something like, this could be my daughter. And at that moment, he stopped what he was doing and dropped this violent response towards what I had said to him, because I was being very violent. I was directly accusing this man of not having any compassion, not being a horrible person, calling him a pig, which is unfair to pigs, but anyway, and this kind of thing. So it's like, and this guy in that moment, he had this moment of connection somehow in his head about, this could be my daughter. He didn't say that to me, but that was my sense of what went through his head. So it's like in that moment of connection, he just dropped all the violence and the knee-jerk response. So we can express our displeasure with what's going on and do it in a way that isn't violent. I think that is what we are asking, what our practice is asking us to do. So it's not saying be passive, it's not saying be submissive. It's saying, in some ways, it's saying find your equanimity, cultivate that equanimity, and go out there and do your best to make things better. And so that is, I think, what our practice is. So I'll just end this by saying this. Practice is hard. I've said this before. Practicing is hard. It's hard to cultivate empathy when you're upset. It's hard to cultivate a sense of equanimity and connection when you feel like somebody is verbally or physically attacking you. This is not to say that we do not set boundaries, because we do. But do we set boundaries with anger, punitively, with a desire to hurt? Or do we set boundaries in a way that has sanity, equanimity, and is actually going to help the situation? Thank you.